You're tuned in to Ask the Master Auto Technician. Car questions? Get answers right now. Call 850-763-0555.
James Auto Center, we fix it right, guaranteed. Beep, 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 yeah!
All right, welcome back to our second part of our show. I got Rob Lapham calling all the way from Port St. Joe, Florida. We just got finished concluding our election season. We both did not do as well as we'd love to have done. I think Neil Dunn was victorious in District 2. Robert Carroll was victorious against me in the race for County Commission, District 2 as well for Bay County. Let's see, Chuck.
And the big upset was Brandon Caldwell.
Brandon Caldwell.
Who has no experience, and he's going to be given a helicopter and poisonous gas to spray Bay County. He's a new commissioner for the mosquito.
Well, he did defeat an entomologist.
Tell me this is not a mad world.
I mean, it's serious. I mean, he beat out John Smith. His name appeared first on the ballot, and that's because he kept telling me, he kept calling me up and saying, "My name's first on the ballot. I stand a good chance of winning." And I kept thinking about, really, just because your name's first on the ballot? And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, I guess so." Well, guess what? His name was first on the ballot, and he won. And he's a server at Hammerhead Fred. Nice guy, don't get me wrong. A little eccentric, aren't we all a little bit? But he beat out an entomologist. And as mosquito board. Wow, it's amazing out there. Anyway, but we do have some crazy races out. Donald Trump was victorious. A lot of people are thinking that things are going to get better, and I hope they do get better. I hope our economy gets better. But one of the things you brought to my attention during this campaign, that you say the unemployment rate in Northwest Florida, in our area, is not 5%, it's not 6%, it's not even 8%. We're talking about upwards of over 20%. And I've had people call me up and go, "I just find that so hard to believe how you can say 20% when everybody is saying it's less than 5%. And I try to explain to them, I said, they're using new math, and they just don't understand what I'm saying. Can you kind of explain in nice, simple, easy terms why it's higher than the 4 or 5% they keep telling us out there that's happening?
Sure. Well, there's two answers to that as far as the Panhandle is concerned. Number one, when the U.S. Department of Labor says the national unemployment rate is 5%, and using the same criteria that they use, and then one particular source is ballotpedia.org that pulled other information from the Department of Labor and applied it just to the Panhandle, showed that our unemployment rate was 11.9% in the counties of the Panhandle as compared to the national. And that's just using Department of Labor definitions of what unemployment is. But where you get to 20% is by taking into account those people who have just got fed up with looking for jobs. They'd like to work, but everywhere they go, there's no jobs, or they're not qualified. And so it's called the labor participation rate, which is the lowest that it has ever been. I think it's in the low 60% range right now.
Yeah, that's what I
So
understand.
that's true. I mean, when you say 20%, that's a more accurate reflection of people who don't have jobs who would like to have jobs.
Well, yeah, it seems to me like it's if you tell a lie, a big enough lie, often enough, people will believe it. And this is something that I just keep telling them. I said, if you use the same criteria that we used in the 1980s to define inflation or define unemployment, those two right there, you would find our inflation is a lot higher than 2%. You'd find it, I want to venture to say, closer to, I want to say to 6 to 8%, if not higher, yearly. And then if you start looking at what our unemployment is using the same criteria from the 80s, you'll see it's not 4 or 5%. It's pushing up towards the 20%, maybe even higher, using the same criteria from the 80s. And when did it change? Did it happen in the last, 90s, 91? Is that when did this new math come out to figure unemployment and inflation? When did that come about?
I think there are several answers. It depends on which phony numbers you're talking about. The basket of goods, food mostly, and dishwasher detergent and so on, things that a household buys, that's the basis for the consumer price index.
Right.
And when the government says that there is no inflation or little inflation, or they understate the real inflation, what they do, and I think this is the Department of Labor again, is they take that pound of steak, which was tenderloin or Chateaubriand or filet mignon, and instead they substitute a pound of chuck steak. I'm characterizing here, but they downgrade the caliber of the food product. And so now you still have a pound of steak in your food basket,
Right.
but it's not the same quality as it was.
Yep.
And yet the government says, well, this is the new basis on which we are measuring what it costs to live. And therefore, surprise, surprise, the cost of living has not gone up.
That's
but
right.
frankly, you're eating beans instead of a decent meal in order to meet that target. So the real cost, if you put the filet mignon back in the basket instead of the pound of ground chuck or whatever it is, your inflation would definitely increase. So we all had that at the beginning of this year. A letter from the Social Security Administration for those of us who are on Social Security says there hasn't been any inflation. You're not getting any more money. Well, we know that's baloney, but that's what the government says, and frankly, it saves the government a lot of money by not having to by characterizing or managing the so-called rate of inflation.
It does make you shake your head. I know that I can look at what I paid for a ball joint 10 years ago versus what I paid for that same ball joint on that same car today. That ball joint that cost me 10 years ago would probably, just give an example, would probably cost me, let's say, $45. That same ball joint 10 years later is now costing me between $65 and $70. So it's almost, almost not quite doubled, but more than half of what it used to cost. So we're talking about at least over a period of 10 years, around 20 to 30% increase easily, if not more, in our cost of living in the last 10 years. What you could buy 10 years ago and put in your shopping cart versus what you could do 20 years ago, and now today, it's a big difference. I mean, 20 years ago, you could fill the bottom of your shopping cart up, and have, now you can only put 2 or 3 items, and now you got $20. And it all has to do with the cost of living. What were you going to say, Bianca?
Well, let's look at housing.
Right.
25 years ago, a $50,000 or $60,000 house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in a nice neighborhood. Now that same house costs almost twice, maybe 3 times that.
Almost 3 times. We're seeing houses that back in 2001 were going for $60,000 and $80,000. Now they're going for $210,000, $220,000. And they've not done anything different to it other than put a new roof on it.
Well, maintenance.
Yeah, maintenance. That's the only thing we see different to it. So it's not, to my mind, it's the debasement of our currency. Our money is becoming less valuable, and that's just another name for inflation. 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 It's too early in the morning, Rob. But that's what I'm seeing out there. Even where when you left Texas, I think the way of life out there was a little bit cheaper, possibly, where you left out versus when you came further east. Was there any difference in the cost of living from Texas to Panama City or this area?
I can't say that there was, or at least I don't have enough data.
All right.
We moved to a smaller house because we're retired now and we're sitting on the beach, and possibly in our small community things are a little more expensive than even they might be in Panama City. I haven't noticed that. But I do take your point on inflation generally. Another statistic that hit me a few years ago was that 4 cents in 1914 took a whole $1 to buy 4 cents of goods 100 years later in 2014.
Right.
And so that says that over that 100 years, the currency was devalued, if you will, 25 times, which is that 2,500%? Or I'm not sure what it is.
I don't know. I'm
phenomenal.
It's a big hunk of change. What you could buy for $1 in 1913. Or excuse me. Well, it's. I'm trying to figure this out. It's only worth 4 cents, 3 to 4 cents of what it was in 1913. $1. That's all it buys now, and it's a sad state. And pretty soon, our dollar is going to take It's going to take a wheelbarrow full of dollar bills to be able to buy a loaf of bread. It's kind of
so what it also does in the meantime, James, is it really is it's a tax increase on the population of the entire country.
Absolutely.
as you have to pay more for goods, and as your wage or your salary increases and your income increases, then you move into a higher tax bracket. You have to pay more taxes, and this simply shoulders the burden of government more and more on everybody.
It does.
And this is good news for the big banks. It's good news for wealthy people, and of course, I think we're getting into a separate subject here, but it really is. Inflation is a hidden tax on the entire population of the country, and we ought not to stand for it. It's a complicated issue.
Well,
but we are frankly being screwed by our government.
Well, what happens is, I remember back in the 70s and 80s, if it was figured out in order to retire at that time, I think my parents or someone told me they had to have around $2 million in retirement to get them to their old age till they die. And I said, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, if you start looking at your way you live, what we're living right now, if I wanted to retire now and to live, to my 80s or 90s, I'd have to have a lot more than $2 million to live on the lifestyle I'm accustomed to. And it's just, that's that insidious tax that people don't realize, how their savings are being taken away from them right underneath their nose, and there's nothing they can do about it because our money is actually losing value because of the Federal Reserve. And I got people out there going, well, if we didn't have the Federal Reserve, we wouldn't have stable money. They're doing such a good job out there. I think that we could do a lot better without the Federal Reserve, because what they do is they control the boom and bust cycles by creating inflation. They're the ones that cause the problems. I don't think the free market does it, but I think they restrict the money supply, or they expand the money supply. They're the ones that cause the problem by printing the money and releasing the money, like quantitative easing 4. That is nothing more than printing money and debasing our money, making it worthless. And that's something I'm seeing happen, in car repair. I mean, what I used to be able to do 10, 15 years ago for $500, now it's cost that much. It costs around $1,000, if not more, because things have. My labor rate's gone up in the last 10 years. How much has it gone up in the last? I'd say it's gone up from $65 an hour 20 years ago to where we're over $100 an hour now. $107 an hour. So inflation goes up, labor rate goes up, parts go up, and it's just a vicious cycle to where you have to make more money just to be able to keep your head above water. And that's that tax that people don't seem to realize that's being levied on them, that they just don't realize till it's too late, then it's over with. And that's just the way I see things, and a lot of people see it that way, but I don't think a lot of people do see inflation as a problem. Did anyone talk to you about this in your campaign, about inflation being a problem?
I've been asked the question, and I, as I've said before, I often refer to a ballotpedia.org extraction from the U.S. Department of Labor that shows that our unemployment rate is more than twice the national average.
Wow.
We're hurting in obviously mostly rural.
Right.
The Panhandle is mostly rural. Obviously, in Panama City, that's an exception. But for most of the area, small towns, and there's not a lot of work.
No, there's not out there, and that's where the deplorables live. Someone told me. He said, if you look on the map, who voted for Trump, all of Northwest Florida was pretty well red, with the exception of the Tallahassee area. That's the only only blue part I saw in the Northwest Florida map. Who voted for Trump? It seemed like that was the only area that voted Democratic, was right in the Tallahassee area. But Rob, we got about 15 seconds left. What would you like to tell everybody till we talk to you again next week?
Well, I'm giving some thought to my campaign. I'm going to be doing a write-up on what we did well, what we could have done better, how we approach, at least on the congressional side, the next couple of years. How do we strengthen getting the message out on what libertarianism really is, why it's good for us, how we find venues to offer to speak to the issues. I don't think we need to have an active campaign going to take advantage of some opportunities. I just have to identify where they are.
That's right.
And the other thing is the Libertarian Party of Florida has its annual convention in Cocoa Beach next, I guess it's March or April. I'll need to look up the date. But by gosh, if anyone's thinking of running for office, you don't leave it to the last minute. I'd like to see Libertarian candidates declare their intent to run for office next spring in Cocoa Beach, and then we've got time to plan campaigns as opposed to last minute. Too much of what I did was last minute, and I regret I wasn't active sooner.
Same thing here.
Thank you for listening, James.
Right. Well, hey, I really appreciate you calling, Rob. We'll talk to you again next week. And this is James Morris along with Rob Lapham from Port St. Joe, and Anna Marie Morris manning our phones back there. And we'll be talking to y'all tomorrow morning. Bye-bye, everybody.
James Auto Center.